Well, Qatar's Prime Minister has told the United Nations that world development cannot be achieved without peace and security. Mohammed Bin Abdulrahman Al-Thani spoke during the opening session of the Summit of the Future. It's ahead of main General Assembly meetings in New York later next week.
Qatar is involved in many mediation efforts, including currently between Israel and Palestine, alongside Egypt and the US, to put an end to this bloody, catastrophic war on Gaza. We reiterate our call to reach a ceasefire agreement and to release all hostages. We call on the international community to take a clear and decisive stance in relation to violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, and in relation to continuous attacks on hospitals, schools and relief workers.
Well, Gabriel Elizondo is at the UN headquarters in New York. Gabe, tell us more about what's happened at the proceedings today.
Yeah, this is essentially a major conference, the Summit of the Future, the UN is calling it. It's a major initiative by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and they have been negotiating what's called the Pact of the Future, this very long and dense document that has been negotiated by all 193 member states for many years now, but the negotiations have really culminated in the last few days. It was voted upon or agreed upon by consensus, and it really deals with all aspects of multilateralism. There's a lot in this. It talks about AI, for example, is one of the new things being put in here. Also sustainable development, specifically changes to the financial architecture, financial institutions. There are no real hard proposals per se in this document. It's more of just an acknowledgement that the international community needs to address these issues and start talking about them leading into the future. I would say probably the most significant thing to come out of the Summit of the Future, this Pact of the Future, as they're calling it, is an acknowledgement by all member states that there needs to be reforms in the UN Security Council. It's the first time in decades that the General Assembly has come up with any sort of agreement. Nothing is going to happen tomorrow or even next week for that matter, but at least in this document there's an acknowledgement, particularly that Africa needs more representation on the Security Council, permanent representation. That is certainly significant, and these are all going to be discussions that guide the UN and the member states in the coming years.
Gabe, you've also spoken to Ireland's president. What has he had to say about Israel's raid and a closure of Al Jazeera's offices in the occupied West Bank?
Yeah, that's right. Michael Higgins, the president of Ireland, is here in UN headquarters. He gave a speech in the General Assembly, as did several other heads of states and heads of governments about the Summit of the Future. He gave a brief press conference to Irish journalists. I was able to attend that, and he has been very strong for many years about the need for press freedom. So I asked him specifically what his reaction was to the fact that Israel shut down the Al Jazeera offices in Ramallah, and this was his response.
Well, I strongly condemn it. I think it's outrageous. And I would go on to say as well as that it tells you a very, very great deal, their refusal to allow Al Jazeera to operate in Israel, for example. And also I know very, very much, I pass on my sympathy to you and your colleagues about your colleague in Al Jazeera who has been killed in Gaza.
Now, President Higgins has several bilateral meetings with other world leaders over the coming days. I asked him if he plans to bring up this issue of Israel closing the Al Jazeera office in Ramallah during his meetings. He said that's certainly something that he is going to strongly consider. I can also tell you that there are over 130 heads of state or heads of government that are here in the UN building over the coming days, and certainly this is going to be a question that will be asked of them, because many of these world leaders talk a lot about press freedom. Now will be their chance to certainly comment on it, given the dire situation, given Israel's raid on Al Jazeera offices in Ramallah.
All right, thanks very much. That's Gabriel Elizondo at the United Nations in New York.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.